Station after Transit. You're in the right place. This is not the David Broza concert. Film, excuse me. Please welcome the editor of the film, Benjamin Tolentino. I want to start by saying this is one of the more beautiful films in our festival that we've seen. It's really fantastic. And we're excited to have the editor here, actually, because the story's told in a very unique way. Where did this, telling this from different perspectives, where did this start? Where did this come from? Was it a plan all along?
No, actually, it was intended to be a linear movie. But then, after doing a rough cut, my director, Hannah, and I, we kind of got to talking, and she wanted to say a lot of things with the movie, with the issue, that was tackled. And, and we discussed it one by one. And then, I told her that, why don't you give me 4 days and, let me think about it, think about how we're going to restructure this in order to give justice to, all of the things that you want to say. And so, after a few days, I got the idea of, why not make it an episodic film?
It adds so much to it. I'm actually shocked that it wasn't like that from the beginning, but real credit to the editing job.
Thank
you. So the film is the Oscar nominee from the Philippines. And how was it accepted? Where has it played, and what have the reactions been?
We were kind of surprised, especially because this was Hannah's first movie. There are a lot of overseas Filipino workers, that not only go to Israel, but to different countries, especially to North America. When they see this movie, it hits home, especially also for me because my parents they live abroad, so this is kind of close to my heart, this project. And when we talk about overseas Filipino workers, it talks about kind of reflect on our economy and why we have to do this in the first place. And and it's hard for us because there are so many professionals going abroad because there are lesser and lesser opportunities in the Philippines, and because the economy is, it is bad. I don't want to say it's,
You're in a safe place, I think.
I was talking to a few filmmakers before, and I told them that for you to be able to work at a McDonald's, you would have to have graduated from college, and so for our parents to be able to put us through high school and college, they would have to go abroad and earn money, for our tuition. That's basically the main reason why our parents, work abroad. And, so it's kind of like the problem that we're facing right now.
And are you familiar if, Israel's treatment is probably not so unique to the treatment of migrant workers elsewhere? Are you familiar? Why was Israel chosen as the place to make this film? And do you know if it's similar or different elsewhere?
Well, Hannah, Hannah went to Israel from one of her trips, and on her way back home, she met one of the migrant workers who actually, his son had been deported from Israel. So at the airport they got to talking, and and this was where Hannah got the idea for the movie. And from there, as soon as she got home, they got to writing, her and the writer Gian, and and the rest is history.
And do you know if other places, other countries have similar laws, or
no? This is more lenient? I think this is unique to Israel. I guess this is. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is this law was passed to preserve kind of like the Jewishness of Israel.
Oh.
If
that adds another.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated issue to begin with, and of course in a Jewish country it gets even more complicated. But right now that law is not being enforced, from what I understand.
Yeah, they are more lenient. More and more children are getting to stay in Israel. compared to what it was before in 2009.
Yeah. One more question before I open it up to your questions. One of the things that's fascinating to me in the film is the actors. Most of the dialogue's in Hebrew. Can you tell us a little bit about where these actors came from, how they learned Hebrew?
All five of our actors are from the Philippines. None of them live in Israel. So before the movie started, a month before, they would have Skype meetings with people from Israel and kind of like they translated the script from Tagalog to Hebrew, and kind of like they were taught how to say all of their lines in Hebrew. So it was memorized. None of them were understanding what they were saying, but only the context because they knew from the original script. So, it was a 12-man crew, and we shot there for 9 days. And, it was really like a tight schedule. We were considering on getting Filipinos from Israel, so it would be easier. But with, the limited time that we had there to shoot, we didn't have time to kind of like teach them, from the kind of like how to act, all of those things. So we decided to get actors from the Philippines and kind of just teach them how to say their lines.
Interesting. So it's easier to teach Hebrew than to teach acting.
I would say.
I'm just going to add one bit of, because I know a lot of the questions go in direction from the research I've done. There are 75,000 legal migrant workers in Israel. And that makes up only a quarter of the migrant workers that are actually in Israel in different ways, either some illegally, some on tourist visas, and of course there's, and that doesn't include also refugees that are a piece of that pie too that complicate things further. And Israel, really, it's only in the last 20 years or so. It used to be a country that most of its workers came from the West Bank. But since that has become less and less of an option, also some of that is being done illegally, Israel has really been welcoming, so to speak, workers from all around the world, and is no longer, for those of you who visited Israel in the 1980s, you'll see a very different country today as far as the multiculturalism there and the many different cultures that exist there, and the central bus station area where I think a lot of this film was shot in Tel Aviv is a very different world where you'll mostly not see any Jews living in that area. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. I'll go around with the mic.
So this is just kind of a silly question. Sometimes the dialogue was in English, but the subtitles were different from what they said. The subtitles were not exactly the English dialogue, and I was just wondering whether there was a purpose to that or whether it was just, I don't know, an oversight or...
I think it was more of the context of what they were saying, and and some actually when they're speaking in Tagalog, some of the dialogue as they were translated were kind of, I don't want to say lost, but they were just translating, and the essence, that was honestly, like, I don't know why they weren't translated as word for word. I think it was more of the effort of what she was trying to say and what was said, because it wasn't what was written was different from what they were saying. Yeah.
This happens sometimes. I wouldn't spend too long on it. Yes.
Hi, I really, really enjoyed watching the acting. It was amazing.
Thank you.
And I just had a question. I mean, it's so heartbreaking. So the kids who were deported, were there cases of, I guess the workers felt they couldn't leave. It just was so heartbreaking. Have any of those children been tracked and brought back since the law has been let up a bit? Or what? Or are they not, once they're back in the Philippines? That's it.
Well, from what I've heard, some of the kids were able to go back to Israel, but then but some didn't bother going back because the parents came back with them. So, but they didn't want to Well, 'cause to them, if they weren't welcome, why would they come back? So, but other people really, really love Israel. Those who really do, they do come back, and they have.
The big question I want to add here, the big question that Israel really needs to grapple with is right now, I mean, just as a country a modern country that has such a large workforce, if they're going to include migrant workers and allow them in, give them legal permits, and then those migrant workers have children there, get married to Israelis, Jewish Israelis, and have children there, how are they going to define, not always is the definition, since Israel's an extremely unique country of how you become a citizen. It's not like America, if you were born there, you become a citizen. You really have to be Jewish in order to become a citizen.
Yeah.
And Israel needs to figure out how, if they're going to allow migrant workers to become citizens at times, or to have some level of citizenship, what that's going to do to and this is why they created this law, what this is going to do to the identity of the country as far as it being a Jewish country. Because right now in Tel Aviv, if you go to public schools, you'll see classes that are filled with kids that are not necessarily Jewish. And they are studying the identity of this country is Jewish, and therefore the public schools keep Jewish holidays, tell Jewish stories, and have, even if in the secular schools, have a certain Jewish identity. And this becomes a very tricky cultural question for Israel. And Israel, I think, in its growing pains, needs to figure it out. We're going to take a question here and then there.
How much did Israel support you with the movie?
I'm sorry.
How much was Israel part of the production of the film? Did they support it?
Well, they monetary, not so much, but they got support with the kind of like the locations and getting permits and all of that stuff when they were there. When they were going around and where could this be shot? This scene could be shot and all those stuff, but. Other than that, they were kind of on their own when they were shooting.
I didn't notice in the credits any Israeli funds. Usually you'll see at the beginning a big
Yeah.
clip of the Israeli funds. There might not be a treaty between the Philippines and Israel for film fund collaboration, which any other Israeli film fund that you'll see, I'd say the majority of them, you'll see an Israeli fund plus another country, Germany, whatever it would be. So I did not notice that. For this film, though, I understand that there was collaboration on the ground and support on that level. An interesting element here, by the way, Israel does support films on this topic. We've screened here at the festival films on this topic that I'd say, actually, surprisingly, were more critical of Israel. I found this film, in many ways, to be a little less critical, despite being critical of the policy. Most of the Israelis in the film were depicted pretty positively. If it's the people they worked for, to the most part, even the policeman at the end who takes the kid says to him, "Let me help you," and you're not seeing I've seen other films where it's the evil policeman. I've seen that both in documentaries, so it's real, and in fiction films. So this was a very interesting perspective as far as the depiction of Israel on it. So I believe Israel would have possibly supported a film like this if the right kind of treaty was in place. I have this guy next.
What exactly was, what was Janet's relationship exactly to Joshua and his father?
Janet and Moises are siblings. So Joshua was his nephew.
First of all, I was so deeply touched by the film.
Thank you.
The thing that came up for me, and I know about what happened, in '09, was the hiding, the being in hiding, the going into hiding. Immediately, I thought of the Jews during the Holocaust going into hiding, and it just shocked me. And my question is, was that an intention of the writer, the director, the editor, you, Was that a deliberate intention to highlight that, or is that just something that came out in the course of filming?
It definitely wasn't in the forefront when they were writing it and we were, when they were shooting it. But as the material kind of matured when we decided to make it episodic, because the issues per episode, when it got highlighted, in many different ways, from Janet, from the oldest to the youngest, a lot of that would have been lost had we not, made it episodic. So, at first it might not have been deliberate, but as we went along, as we kind of built from one episode to another, we were able to, I think, effectively, give light into issues of identity, issues of, not only deportation, but all of these other things that we were able to touch on. So.
And I do want to add one other fact that I think I heard about the film, that most of your 5 main actors were from the Philippines, but a lot of the extras kind of in scenes, they were shot as like real scenes with real people on the beach
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Like I heard that the birthday party scene was all kind of like
It
improvised.
was supposed to be, well, in the script, it was supposed to be inside the house.
I'm sorry, but I don't understand the law itself. Oh, sorry. I don't understand the law itself. They were sending little children back to the Philippines. Were they unaccompanied? Were they, who met them at the other end? What happened to them when they got there? Were any provisions made for them when they got back there? Who would take care of them?
Usually, when kids get deported from Israel and back to the Philippines, they would notify the families. For example, if I had a kid, I would contact for example, my brother or my sister. And, if I didn't decide to go home, if only my kid was going to go home, they were going to take care of my kid, which what happened to a lot of the kids that got deported back home, because the parents had to stay in Israel so they could provide for their families, so it was hard for them. And, it was mostly like their brothers and sisters that would raise their kid,
There was a certain time in the law where there was a law specifically with pregnant women who were migrant workers. Their visas would not be renewed at a certain point of pregnancy if they knew. Of course, I'm sure they hid this as much as they could. But that was in order to avoid a situation where children would be born there. And yes, they would either you were forced to go back like this, like as it was portrayed in this film, with your child, or you would send your child back at times, and you would actually not be able to spend time with your child.
Hello. There was some confusion as to Joshua's mother. I'm not sure whether she married an Israeli, they divorced, plus Janet's husband. She mentioned that the husband was Israeli, but then she sort of sloughed it off and said, but we're not going to discuss that. So I was confused.
I think you're not confused.
I don't know. Well, Joshua's mother, she did marry an Israeli. And, when she was talking to Moises in that scene, Moises was actually, she was telling the ex-wife, that Joshua's mother, that Joshua doesn't have to go home if you decide to take him in. It's not that hard if you decide to, but she doesn't want to do anything, with the kid. So, which is why, it was his Moises' last-ditch effort for Joshua to be able to stay there. Had she said yes, Joshua wouldn't have to be deported.
And Janet is Yael's father is Israeli.
Yes, and the third episode, the girl that had just come from the Philippines, it's kind of like a mirror of Janet. It was what happened to her before. She got pregnant in Israel, and which she didn't want. Well, you know, it was kind of implied that the third character, in the third episode, that she was raped. But we didn't want to get into it that much because we didn't want to flesh it out and all that stuff. So she didn't want to do anything with Yel's father. That's why she decided to live away from him and just with her family.
Folks, we're going to take the last two questions here. And for those of you who are going down to the David Broza event, if you have tickets already, I would do that now. Now is the time.
Could you just tell us something about what is the Israeli law when migrant workers come in? Do they get permits to work for 2 years or 1 year? Because these people, it seems like they got in and at some point they were legal. So at what point do they become illegal?
Some of them do have permits and visas. Some of them come in as tourists and kind of like stay there illegally after. I don't know. Sorry, could you help me out?
I honestly don't know the laws there as far as how that goes.
They get visas for a certain amount of time, and then sometimes they're renewed and sometimes they're not. Sometimes people end up going back to the Philippines, coming back, renewing, and most of this is done through
Agencies.
which take advantage of most of the workers, and in terms of renewing and not, and it's just a terrible system, and the way that, the fact that this law came into being, and there was a lot of fighting against it by people who said this is inhumane to try to kick out these children who were born in Israel and all they know is to be Israeli. They're not Filipino because they show they don't speak the language, and then they're being sent back to the Philippines. A lot of times they have to go back to their grandparents, but they have this cultural dilemma once they get back there. So I just wanted to add, thank you very much for making this movie, because I was living in Israel at the time the law passed, and I think that this puts this into much, all the deep issues that come out in the movie. You really see that, and when you see it from the first perspective of the Filipinos, rather than reading it in a newspaper where it's just a bunch of people, complaining that their children are going to be deported. It doesn't hit you the same way as effectively as in this movie. So thank you very much. It was really excellent.
Thank you.
And please tell your friends who are Oscar voters to check this one out and make the most of it, because I think there's a lot to learn from this film.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Such a talented cast, director, and editor. I'm so in love with Joshua. I will be able to see him in my dreams and with so many expressions. What was the audition process to find that such a fine, talented young actor?
It was the film came from a grant. There in the Philippines, there's this festival called Cinemalaya where they would give 500,000 pesos and to 10 filmmakers, and one of those was Transit. And and for 2 days they held auditions for the whole entire day, and they would ask them, Hannah would ask them specific scenes that she would think would best encapsulate who Joshua is, and if they were able to execute that the way that she imagined it, then it came down from 10 to 5 to 3, and then eventually. And actually, you know what, Joshua, Mark, his real name, just won an acting award last month.
Well deserved. Benjamin, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here. Thank you all. We have a
Thank you for.
a big day tomorrow of many films, a panel starting here at noon, and then, of course, 2 o'clock Fire Lines, and 4 o'clock Almost Friends, 6 o'clock Villa Tuma, and Zero Motivation after that. We look forward to seeing you all week here as part of Other Israel. Please help spread the word. Thank you.